Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Natalie Berry. I am the Registration Manager at the Health and Care Professions Council, currently responsible for the continuing professional development process. I am joined today by my colleagues Holly Butler, who is the Events and Communication Officer, and Alex Smirnos, who is the Team Leader within Registration, responsible for CPD also. So today I will be talking about continuing professional development. I will refer to continuing professional development as CPD throughout the presentation. So just to let you know what I'll be covering off today, I will just give you a brief overview of who we are as a regulator, as the Health and Care Professions Council. Again, I will refer to us as the HCPC, which I'm sure you are familiar with. I will also be covering off what is continuing professional development, and I'll be looking at the 5 CPD standards, which hopefully you are all familiar with. And then I'll be talking about the CPD audit process, which is more around, if you are selected, what you need to do. So hopefully you'll find that helpful. Then we'll just go into audit outcomes. So the different type of outcomes if you are selected, and also our deferral process. And I will round off the webinar with a Q&A session. However, I probably will stop at some point throughout the presentation just to see if we have any pressing questions come through. So just moving on, just as I said briefly, we are the Health and Care Professions Council. We are independent UK-wide statutory regulator. Our powers do derive from the Health and Profession Order 2001. Essentially, our purpose, in short, is to protect the public. As you can see there, it does say to safeguard the health and well-being of persons using or needing the services of registrants. We do have a separate role from professional bodies and trade unions, and we are overseen by the Professional Standards Authority, who are referred to normally as the PSA, and in short, they are the regulators of the regulators. So that is just a recap of who we are. We are a multi-professional regulator, so unlike a lot of other health regulators who only regulate one profession, we are actually a multi-professional regulator, which means we have 15 different professions on our register. And you can just see here is a list of all the professions we regulate. So I know I am joined today by a number of different professions, so I welcome you all. You can see here as well, I just thought it would be helpful to provide just when the renewal opens for each of the professions and the deadlines for that. So at the moment we do have practitioner psychologists in renewal who went into their renewal on the 1st of March 2001, or this year, and the deadline is the end of May. And the CPD, although a different process, the timelines are the same in that if you are selected, that would happen at renewal opening, and the deadline does remain the same as the renewal deadline. So just moving on, I just wanted to talk briefly before we kind of get into the depths of CPD, just to explain what makes up our register. The register is made up of essentially 4 different standards. The first one being standards of education and training. If you study within the UK, in order to get onto the register and be registered with us, you would have to have done an approved programme. And these programmes within education providers do need to meet our standards of education training standards. We also have standards of proficiency. Each profession, which I'm sure you're familiar with, have their own standards of proficiency. These are the threshold standards we expect for each profession. And as I say, each profession does have their own standards on that. Just moving on, we have standards of conduct, performance and ethics. This document is aimed at all of our different professions, and it is essentially, in short, what we expect from you as a registrant in terms of kind of obviously your conduct, your performance and your ethics, and it covers a variety of different subjects, you know, just in terms of what we would expect from you in professionalism and etc. So I'm sure you are all familiar with that document also. And then lastly, what we're going to be talking about today is CPD and your registration. So this webinar is aimed at obviously CPD and what that means for you and if you are selected. So I do hope you do find the next hour or so helpful. Okay, so what is CPD? Essentially, it is keeping up your skills and knowledge up to date and ensuring continuing fitness to practice. CPD is what I always say is a way of ensuring you are working safely and effectively. It needs to be relevant to your scope of practice. We are mindful that we have 15 different professions, and within those, we may have someone that is more frontline and someone that's more based in management or academia. So you need to ensure that the CPD that you are doing is relevant to your scope of practice, and I will be talking more about that later on. Our CPD is outcomes based. So again, unlike some regulators, we're not based on points and hours. Our focus is a lot more on what do you get from the CPD activities that you are carrying out. That reflection, how does it benefit you? How does it benefit your service user? And lastly, CPD is self-directed and self-managed. There is no official sign-off process. Again, that kind of links in with, there's no set amount of hours that you have to get signed off. The onus is on the registrant, and the trust is put into the registrant to ensure they are carrying out their CPD and ensuring that, a mixture of CPD is done. So that's just a recap of what CPD is. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to run through the standards of CPD, which I hope that you are all familiar with. What I thought would be useful is to kind of run through standard by standard and just explain what that actually means for you. So a registrant must, standard 1, so I won't read these word for word, but essentially standard 1 is that you do need to maintain a continuous, up-to-date and accurate record of your CPD activities. The reason why, essentially, I don't know about you, but I don't remember essentially what I've done maybe 2 weeks ago, never mind 2 years ago. And if you are selected for audit, we are asking for that 2-year window when, that renewal or registration window, we're asking what CPD you've done. So it is very important that you keep a record of your CPD. Now, I completely understand you are very busy working professionals, and what we say is, and the feedback I get from registrants is that, once you keep on top of it and just log it as you're going, it makes that task a lot easier. It also means that if you are selected for audit, it's a lot less stressful process of trying to run around and gather and figure out dates of when you've done your CPD activities and how long were they, etc. So our standard 1 is that you must maintain a list. How you maintain that list is completely up to you. There is no right or wrong. You may use an Excel spreadsheet, or you may use a design portal that is for the purpose of recording your CPD. Again, it is completely up to you. Our main concern is that you do keep that record. So here's just an example of a dated list. Now, this is a very brief example, but it is just around kind of the level of detail is relevant for your needs. So for example, here we've put external training. Now, are you going to remember what that meant? So what I would always advise is when writing down your learning activities and logging them, put a brief kind of description of what that was around so that, if you do need to reflect on it, whether you're audited or not, exactly what you've done. And that just gives you an idea. We do understand some of the activities you do may be over a few days, some might be on a particular day. So we've just given you an example, very brief example of, simply what we would advise you to do for standard 1. And as mentioned, there's no perfect way to record your CPD. That onus is completely on you and how, it works best for you. So I'm just going to move on now to standard 2, which essentially is that you demonstrate that their CPD activities are a mixture of learning activities relevant to current or future practice. And what we mean by current and future practice is that ensuring the CPD that you are doing is relevant to the work that you are doing now. But also we understand that you may be preparing for a role that you are going for, or you may be doing more than one job role and you have something coming up. So therefore, also thinking about your future practice and is there certain skills that you need to learn for that, and therefore your CPD should also be relevant to that. And I just wanted to talk about what I mean by a mixture of activities. So if I just get these up for you to have a look at, I think it might be helpful if I just get this up all together. So hopefully you can see that essentially, again, I would like to stress this is a very brief list. I didn't want to kind of overpopulate the slides with too much information, but I do just want to say that on our website, we have a much larger list of CPD activities. But again, these are not an exhaustive list. This is just an example of, some of the activities you may be doing, just to give you an idea. So a mixture, we have work-based learning. So this could be things like in-service training, reflective practice, work shadowing. There's also professional activity. So it may be that you're involved in some mentoring, or you have some involvement with your professional body. And then formal and educational, this is what most people think of when they think of CPD. So they think courses, you know, these fancy conferences and things like that. But it just makes up part of CPD. But of course, it is one part of CPD that is relevant. Self-directed learning, so reading journals and books, things like internet research. And then we have other, which is essentially, you know, you may be doing some voluntary work that is allowing you to pull on your, you know, your skills and knowledge, and you're doing some CPD around that. So again, this is just to get you thinking about what we mean by a mixture. So standard 2 is to ensure that you are doing a mixture and that you're not just doing kind of just formal learning, for example. And the reason why we stress this is because we are mindful that you can only learn so much from one type of activity. So there's only so much you can get from attending maybe 20 different courses, you know, and then obviously doing self-directed learning, you can learn in other ways, for example. So that's the activities. And I'm just going to move on to standards 3 and 4 together, actually, because they link into each other quite well. So standard 3 is around, you know, ensuring that your CPD is contributed to your quality of practice and service delivery. And standard 4 is seek to ensure that your CPD benefits the service user. And what we mean by that, and I think maybe what I'll just home in on first, is the service user. So we get asked a lot, you know, well, who is my service user? Now, what I simply say is anyone that is affected or impacted by your work. So you will probably find you have more than one service user. So for example, if you are working in academia, you know, naturally your service users will be your students, but it may also be your fellow lecturers or colleagues that are impacted by the work in which you do. If you're in management, you know, naturally it would be your team, your members of your team, but again, it would be your colleagues. And obviously, if your team are then going out to see patients, for example, it has that knock-on effect of they are your end service users. So it's very important to think about who your service users are. If you're a profession where you don't actually have contact with anyone, for example, you may be working in a lab, we would say think about your end service users. So although you're not having maybe that human interaction with them, think about if you did something wrong or something was to go wrong, the impact that would have on the end service user and who that person would be. So just to think about it in that way. And what we ask is if you are selected for audit, you would need to provide basically reflections on maybe around 4 to 6 activities throughout the 2 years, just reflecting on how they benefited you and your service user. And I'm just going to move on to the next slide. So in that, for those activities, we ask that you provide evidence. I do want to stress this isn't evidence like in the court of law. It's more around, you know, having a look at your list of activities and thinking about, you know, a mixture. So have you done some courses? Have you done some self-directed learning? And then, you know, things like materials from others. So have you attended, for example, attending this today is definitely part of your CPD. So if you were audited, you could provide that you attended this and maybe the PowerPoint slides that we then send on to you, which you then maybe have some reflection notes on. That could be evidence. Materials kind of produced by yourself. So have you put together a presentation that you've delivered? And if so, you know, you could provide that as evidence. Also things like induction materials for new members of staff. You know, again, this is a very brief kind of list of evidence. We do have a much more extensive list on our website. If you are selected and you're struggling to think about what you could submit for evidence, but materials showing that you've reflected on and evaluated your works. You know, even just reflection notes, personal development plans. Have you read an article and then you reflected on it? Was there a meeting and you've taken some action plans afterwards and you have notes of those? All of these kind of things, not just, you know, you went to a course and you had a fancy certificate. I mean, by all means, you can submit that as evidence, but just to get you thinking of what we mean by evidence. And then just moving into standard 5, so submitting a profile for audit. Standard 5 essentially is upon request present a written profile which must be of your own work and supported by evidence, which I just touched upon, explaining how you've met the standards. So just a few points on that. When it says written, we by no means do we mean you need to sit down and handwrite your profile. What we mean is that if you are selected, you do need to submit a profile. We now have an online system for you to do that, and it's the same system in which you would have if you were when you're renewing. So this is something we've newly introduced, which we hope will make things a lot easier for our registrants. So at renewal, just to recap, we select 2.5% of each profession that's in renewal and at that time. It's a completely random selection, which I can assure it is. And that does mean that, you know, in some cases you might have a colleague who may have been selected more than once and any time throughout their registration. Those selected must submit their profile by the end of the renewal period. So as I mentioned before, the deadline is the same as your renewal deadline. And when we receive your profile, it is reviewed and assessed by our HCPC partners, which are our CPD assessors. Our CPD assessors are paired up and made of two of our registrants. One will always be from your profession. So for example, if you're a physiotherapist, you'll always have one assessor that is a physiotherapist and potentially another from the other profession. Although with this said, we generally have 2 assessors of the same profession assessing your profile. So just moving on, and I know this is the part that most people are mainly interested in, you know, what happens if I am selected? What is the profile? What needs to go into it? How much work needs to go into it? So hopefully I can give you all that information on this webinar, and hopefully I can provide you some reassurance as well that actually it's not this massive, horrendous task, you know, that you need to do, and we're not asking for massive amounts of work from you. So CPD profile, essentially what would have to happen is that if you are selected, and this is why I say around standard 1 and the importance of logging your CPD throughout your registration, is provide us a list of your CPD activities for the last 2 years. If there are gaps larger than 3 consecutive months, these will need to be explained. For example, if it was due to ill health, then you would need to explain that there's a gap in your CPD for that reason. Summary of recent work in the last 2 years, and we say 500 words. Now, just to stress, this is just an approximate. This is just to give you an idea. It doesn't have to be 500, but it just gives you an idea of how much writing we're looking at from you. So why we need this, the 2 assessors assessing your profile don't know you personally, and the only way that they can deem that you meet those standards is to have information about who you are. So, you know, who are you? What do you do? What's within your work role? Is there anything that's coming up that you're preparing yourself for? As mentioned before, you know, are you going into another role? Are you taking on more responsibilities? Just letting them know kind of what you've been doing for the last 2 years and what you've got coming up. And then we go into a statement of how you meet the standards. And again, this is approximately 1,500 words. And as mentioned before as well, we don't want you to sit there writing about every single CPD activity that you have done for 2 years, because we do understand that would be a lot of writing and a lot of work, and we really don't need you to be sitting down doing that. So my best advice is to have a look at your list of CPD activities and pick around 4 to 6 activities. Make them a mixture. So don't just pick 4 or 5 formal courses. Make it a mixture. So, you know, pick up maybe some self-directed learning, some in-house training, some formal training. You know, just having that mixture is really important to demonstrate you meet standard 2. And then when you have your examples, reflect on them. Think about, what did you learn from them? How did they benefit you? What did it make you change within your practice? How did it also affect and benefit your service users? Again, thinking about who your service users are. Use that time to really reflect. And the key here is that we are looking for quality over quantity. And this is why those reflection pieces are very important. And that will demonstrate that you meet those standards 3 and 4. And then lastly, the 4th section of the profile is around the evidence. So we only want you to evidence those 4 to 6 activities you've picked out. Again, we do not need evidence for everything you've done in 2 years, because again, that would be a horrendous task that we wouldn't want to put on you, and there'd be actually no benefit for us to see all of that. So when thinking about your 4 to 6 examples, 2 things: think about picking out a mixture, and also those that you can evidence as well. So when you'll find, if you have been selected, I'm not sure if anyone that's joining us today has actually gone through the process, but now that we have the online system, it is broken into 4 sections, which is, the feedback that we've had is very easy to use and navigate through, and it's broken into these sections. So hopefully that just makes this a lot kind of easier and more straightforward for our registrants if they are selected. So I hope that just reassures you a bit more as well. So I'm just going to move on. Obviously, we can't ignore the fact that we've had a really challenging year with COVID-19. And we did, as a regulator, when obviously the pandemic first started, we did cancel some of the audits in the initial stages. The audits have now resumed as of late last year. And what I just wanted to kind of go over, and again, this is just more hopefully reassuring that, we are trying to be supportive and flexible in terms of CPD and obviously, the pandemic and what we've gone through. So I just thought I would provide some tips for completing a CPD audit following COVID-19. Again, this is only applying if you are selected for CPD or you find yourself selected in future. So reflect on your self-directed learning through the pandemic. What you'll probably find is through these really challenging times, you've probably done, more self-directed learning. There's been new learning activities that you've had to take on. There's been things that have happened outside of the norm that you've had to reflect on. So really pull on those if you have been selected for CPD, because you'll find there's a lot that can be learnt from those activities. Reflect on training through the pandemic. So you'll probably find you may have been provided with additional training, things like PPE training, patient care training. These are just some that I'm kind of plucking out, but you may find there's been additional training. So all of this is relevant to your CPD if you are selected. So really think about what has come up during obviously the last year. Don't struggle to fill in the COVID gaps. We are very mindful as a regulator that, as mentioned before, gaps larger than 3 consecutive months do need to be explained. But we are very mindful that it was an extremely busy time probably for all of you. There was a lot of stress happening, there were a lot of changes going on, and just work demand probably really increased. So we are completely understanding the fact that there may be gaps in your CPD for these reasons. And that's okay. You can explain that in your profile if you are selected. Don't record all work activities. So this is the general advice I give regardless anyway, because what we find is sometimes people, registrants that are selected, will start listing off things like a weekly team meeting that is maybe just part and parcel of their role and their responsibilities, and there's actually no learning activities, but it was just something they had to go and do on a weekly basis. We don't want to know about your work activities. So when you're thinking about CPD activities, think about things that you've actually learned from, that you've had to reflect on, that have benefited you or your service user. And don't limit yourself. So what we mean by this, there are probably things, and hopefully this webinar is quite thought-provoking for you, but there's probably things actually that you have done that you haven't realised are even CPD, but actually they are. And when you start reflecting on that, you'll probably start to see you've done probably a lot more CPD than you first thought. So again, just having those thought processes and not limiting yourself. And just show how your CPD meets the standards clearly. So hopefully by me breaking down the standards and how, if you are selected in your profile, you demonstrate you can meet those standards. Hopefully that kind of clears up what would be required from you. So just kind of to recap on that, it's, standard one's around keeping an up-to-date list. So when we're asking for your dated list, that's a way of demonstrating you meet standard 1. Standard 2 is around a mixture. So think about that list. That list is going to demonstrate your mixture. And then 3 and 4, standards 3 and 4, they are around more reflecting on how it's benefited you and the service user. So you can see how all the 4 components of the profile then link into the standards. I've also written a top tips for completing a CPD audit following COVID-19 blog, and the link's there at the bottom. So when we will provide these slides to you, and you will be able to click onto that link to have a read of the blog, which provides a lot more information. I think what I'll do, because I've probably been talking at you for quite a bit now, I'll probably just ask Holly if we've had any questions in the chat box that have come up for me to answer.
Yeah,
just halfway through, I think it'd be good. Thank you.
Yeah, so we've had one about, you're echoing a bit there. Do you want to put me on, if you're on mute while I'm speaking?
Yeah.
Or put yourself on mute.
Yeah. I'll probably need to come out of the screen, Holly, to mute that. Is that okay?
But it's basically if someone's registered for another health council as well as the HCPC in another country and they're being audited with this other health council, can we provide a letter stating compliance here even if we have not been audited by the HCPC in the UK? So if they're being audited in another country by where they're also registered to?
Okay, just to clarify, Holly, they're asking, can we provide a letter for them?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. We don't really have a set letter that we can provide. Obviously, as part of being on our register, there is that self-declaration at renewal every 2 years to say that you meet our CPD standards. So something like that, we can confirm, you know, that someone's continued to renew and declared to us that they're meeting our CPD standards. But obviously, without us auditing them, we're not to know to kind of what standard or if they meet the standards. But that is something that possibly they could email into CPD profiles, and we can just break down the process of what it means by them signing that declaration. But we wouldn't be able to necessarily provide a formal letter to say that compliance is happening, but we could confirm that they do, that, you know, they have renewed and declared that with us in the declaration at renewal every 2 years. So I would probably advise that person to maybe email into us, and we can get back to them on that.
Okay, thank you. You might have already touched on this a little bit as well, but someone's asking, what about the gaps due to lockdown and COVID-19 if they were ill, or some people not working for the NHS and being out of work, you know, on furlough, for example. So how to explain those gaps? Yeah.
Yeah, of course. So I think depending on how long the gap is, the best thing to do if you are selected, in your profile, you can actually explain the gap. So you can simply do that in your dated list or your statement and say kind of between this date and whichever date it was, you know, unfortunately you were unwell and not working, or you were furloughed and not working. The only thing I would say, depending on how big that gap is, there is the deferral process, which I'm going to actually touch upon shortly. And that process means that you don't have to comply with the audit this time round, but you will next, you know, in the next audit in 2 years' time. What I normally say, the kind of rule of thumb, is that if you've done at least a year of those 2 years, you should be able to demonstrate you meet the CPD standards. But if it is longer than that, or it's, you know, best part of a year, then you may want to request a deferral instead. But, you know, depending if someone is selected, they can always email into us for some advice, because ultimately the decision is left with them whether or not they want to submit a profile or request a deferral for reasons of like ill health, for example.
Okay, great, thank you. We're getting more, I think, as we go along, but if I just ask maybe a couple more and we can do the rest towards the end. But someone's asking, will their assessors, will you make sure that their assessors aren't from the same organisation or the same committee? And if that does happen, and you know your assessor, do you find it doesn't matter and they stay your assessor, for example, but do you make sure that they are, they don't know you, for example?
Yeah, so just to confirm, so the two assessors assessing are registrants, but also our partners. So they are bound by obviously our rules and regulations. We do ensure that they are, if an assessor feels they may know a registrant who's been selected by looking at their profile, it's naturally a conflict of interest, and they would have to declare it to us, and we would then allocate it to a different pair of assessors. I think this was part of the question. The assessors and the 2 assessors would remain the assessors throughout the whole kind of audit process. We wouldn't change the assessors. But yeah, I mean, when submitting a profile anyways, the only information that goes over to the assessors is a CPD number and not your information or your registration number. But obviously, naturally, through your profile, you know, they may be able to identify who you are. And as I say, if that is ever the case, which is rare, but if it is, they do have to declare that to us, and we would then reallocate that profile.
Great, thank you. So one more, we've had a couple of ones based around this as well, so it's probably a good one to mention, about using different professional body CPD schemes and different templates that they have.
Yeah.
Can you, if they're doing that on an ongoing basis, reflecting using their schemes, is it possible to submit the CPD summary or diploma from the scheme as evidence? Can the reflections already completed be collated for the statement? So I suppose, can you use those for our evidence?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. We do get that a lot. So just to clarify, our CPD online system, as I mentioned, is made up of 4 components. So there's essentially, to put it quite simply, there's 4 tabs. If you're able to extract information, so download even into a PDF, for example, or copy and paste from these portals that you're using with your professional body, we would ask that you then do that, and you can then put that into our system. So just kind of going more into the system. So the dated list, for example, there's 2 functions. You can either sit down and enter the start and end date and what the activity is manually yourself, or you can upload. So if you're able to extract a PDF, for example, from the system you're using of a dated list, then you can simply upload that onto our system. Again, with the evidence, that's an upload option. So we accept most normal documents like Word, PDFs, etc., Excels. The statement and the summary are free text. So you can either type into these boxes, or you can copy and paste parts from obviously the other systems that you're using. I know that some of these systems kind of put it all into one, I don't know if they call it a profile, but they put it into kind of one bundle. You're not able to just upload that as a whole, and we would ask that you don't do that anyways, because our requirements might be slightly different to how the professional body have their systems laid out. But by all means, some of these systems are great to use, and as I said, a lot of them you can copy and paste from, and a lot of them you can upload documents. I've worked alongside a lot of the professional bodies, and a lot of them are updating their systems, and I have said to them, you know, can you make it as easy as possible for your members to download things and copy and paste, so that if they are selected for, you know, with the HCPC, it makes that a lot simpler for them. So hopefully that answers that, because we get that question quite a lot, so hopefully that helps.
Yeah, great, thank you. Yeah, I think we'll do more questions.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, thank you, Holly. Okay, so I'll continue on with the presentation. We're through most of the slides now, so I'm just going to just give you a nice little diagram here just of the renewal and CPD process. Essentially, as I mentioned, the renewal process and the CPD process are 2 completely separate processes. However, the timelines are the same. So when your renewal window opens, it's at that point that a random selection happens. We then notify you that you have been selected. Now that we have our new system, we're able to email you, and we also send a letter, and that happens at the beginning of that renewal window. This letter and email is separate to your information that's sent to you about your renewals. My best advice to anyone that is selected: renew your registration first, get that out of the way. It's a much quicker process. It's the same system, but don't wait to renew until you've done your CPD profile. Because obviously, as some of you probably are aware, if you don't, well, hopefully you're all aware, if you don't renew in time by the deadline, you do come off the register, and that's the last thing we obviously want. So they do run in parallel. So obviously registration renewal process, you can then renew online, and then your registration is renewed. Obviously, during the 3 months, you can log into the system, you can complete your profile, save it, come back out, go back in as many times as you wish. And then ultimately you'll need to submit the profile by the deadline at the latest. Your profile is then assessed by our 2 assessors that I mentioned to you before. And hopefully the outcome is then that you meet those CPD standards. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about outcomes in a moment, but I'm just going to touch upon deferrals because I know I spoke about this earlier, so I just wanted to give you a little bit more information. So CPD is a requirement registration, but obviously we know in some circumstances you're not able to submit a profile at that time. This could be for a number of different reasons, such as maternity leave, long-term sickness, bereavement, you know, the list goes on, but we do understand there are some circumstances where it would be better to defer your audit. What that means is that you wouldn't need to submit a profile at that time, but you will be selected in 2 years' time at the next audit. And as I said before, it is your choice whether you want to defer. So we have some cases where someone may have been on maternity leave for, say, 8 months of the 2 years, but actually they feel they have enough CPD for the remaining months to submit a profile and meet the standards. So a registrant may think, I just want to do it now, whereas someone else may feel like, actually, no, I'd prefer to defer. Completely up to you. As I said, what my advice probably would be is anything more than a year of not doing CPD for whichever reason, you know, maternity leave, long-term sickness, etc., I would advise that you would defer in those situations because you'd probably find it quite difficult to do enough to present enough CPD to meet the standards, particularly around like the mixture of CPD. So that's just a recap of obviously deferrals. And again, the deferral can be requested through the system. Naturally, not all deferral requests are accepted. So if you are ever audited, it is about thinking carefully. Just to say something along the lines of, I've just been really busy at work, is not generally a reason for deferral, just to clarify. With that said, though, I do want to say that, you know, we are, we do try and be as flexible as possible, particularly with obviously everything that's gone on in the last year. So if you find it's more a case of you need a little bit more time, as opposed to completely deferring, you can email us and say, I just need a bit more time and request that. And we will do our best to be flexible and support you in that by hopefully giving you more time to submit your profile if needed. But as I say, the time period is 3 months, which is a good amount of time. But, you know, my main key message, if anything, is that if you are selected and you're worried or you feel like, you know, you do need more time or things like that, reach out to us, contact us, and we will do our best to support you through that process. So audit outcomes, I just wanted to present you with some data. This data is going a while back, but I thought it was a good way of just capturing, I mean, this data goes back to 2015 to 17, but we've seen the theme throughout the years that we've been doing CPD that these, you know, these are kind of on average the stats that we are looking at in terms of outcomes. And I just thought it'd be a really positive message to give you kind of all to just, again, reassure really. So in terms of outcomes, accepted, you can see, so what this means is someone has submitted a profile and they've met the standards. And that's nearly 80% of our registrants. In that process, there may have been a small number who submitted their profile, didn't meet the standards at the first assessment. There were some shortfalls, but the assessors have come back, asked for further information. For example, if I give you an example of someone that maybe submitted a profile, has a gap larger than 3 months and didn't explain why there's a gap, the assessors will come back and say, standard 1, there's a shortfall, you know, there's a gap of 5 months and we're not sure what's the reason. The registrant then is given the opportunity to provide that information. And what we find is normally on that first attempt of further information, they then meet the standards. So overall, nearly 80% of registrants met our CPD standards. That doesn't mean that the rest didn't. As you can see here, a large amount, well, I say a large amount, the bigger amount then deferred of nearly 12%, which is the process I've just spoken about. And then we have to take on board those that would have come off the register, either for not renewing their registration or voluntarily deregistered for things such as retirement, for example. We then had a small number at that time that were under assessment. These are cases that sometimes are ongoing for a long time. And this could be because they've gone to further information and they've had to go to further information more than once. We also have a process which we sometimes go to, again, a very small number called further time. This is, again, a way of us supporting the registrants. So what this means is if you were ever in the situation where, despite the opportunity for further information, you are still not able to meet those standards, we would then potentially give you an additional 3 months to go away, giving you the information of where your shortfalls are and giving you that opportunity to then meet the standards. I kind of refer to it as a bit of a get out of jail card. You know, we're saying, okay, you've not met the standards for that 2-year period, but here are an additional 3 months. At that stage then, when you submit that further time, if you still do not meet the standards, it's at this point that we will most likely need to remove a registrant from the register. And I would just like to highlight at this point that there's a lot of support given to the registrant. The last thing we want to do is remove any registrant from the register. And I think that can probably be shown here and reflected that over a 2-year period, in total, out of kind of, you know, nearly over 8,500 registrants, we only removed 55, which was less than 1%. And as I say, those 55 would have been given, well, majority of them would have been for non-engagement. So again, I do want to highlight that if you are selected, even if you are worried or you're overwhelmed or you have a lot going on, please, please, please do not ignore the fact you've been selected, because it will probably end up with you being removed from the register if you don't engage. And then again, this is over many opportunities of us saying, you know, we've not heard anything from you. So as I say, please engage with us. We always try to be as supportive as possible. And, you know, these outcomes here just show a really positive message that a majority of our registrants meet the standards and have no problem doing so. Hopefully that is just being kind of, again, reassuring for you. I just want to move into, just before we go kind of into a Q&A, I just wanted to provide you with some of the resources and information we have. So if you haven't seen already, we do have a CPD development and CPD and your registration booklet. This has a lot of information about CPD, the standards, what's expected of you, etc. If you are selected for audit, we have an additional booklet which is around what you need to do. So it covers a lot of what I've spoken about today, and that's normally sent out obviously if you have been selected for audit. On our website, so you can see just the URL down there below, there's a lot of information on CPD. We have much resource. We have videos now of our online system if you are selected. We also have kind of, you know, paper guidances as well, PDFs. We have sample profiles for each profession, which kind of covers different scenarios. If you are selected, it might be worth looking at our sample profiles just to get an idea of what we maybe want from you. And kind of if there's something on our website that you're looking for that you're not able to find or it's not been answered, you know, you can always email us with any of your queries. So just to recap, before we just go into questions, just things I want you to kind of take away from today, things to remember. So those selected for audit will receive an email and letter. This is separate to your renewal invitation, and this will come around at the beginning of your renewal window opening. You can continue to practice during the audit process. So while we are getting your profile assessed, you will still be able to continue to practice. It does not affect your registration in any way. Don't forget your data list to show that you meet standard 1. Any gaps of 3 or more consecutive months will need to be explained. And please do not send us any identifiable information. So what we mean is anything that might have any service user information, whether it be your colleague, your patients, your team members. Please ensure these are redacted. So you can submit documents and things that might have their name, but please ensure you redact that first. And that's very important to remember. So I'm just going to move back into questions now. So Holly, I don't know if you had any more questions. I think you said there were a few more for us to run through in the last kind of 15 minutes.
Yeah, there's been quite a few actually.
Yeah,
I think Alex is typing out some answers as well, which is really great. So, but yeah, there's quite a few different questions. There's one about when registrants will be notified if they've been selected for CPD audit. So, for example, practitioner psychologists, would they have been notified by now? And then how much time are you given from when you get that notification to when you need to submit?
Yeah, so if so practitioner psychologists went into the renewal window opened on the 1st of March. So they would have all been notified by now via email and letter. The email normally goes out within the first few days of the renewal window opening. And the letter, obviously, given the posts and things, and sometimes COVID can take up to about 10 days. 10 working days, I say. So yeah, now that we're in April, if you're a psychologist and you're with us today, as long as your contact details are up to date, you would have heard by now if you've been selected. And then the deadline to submit the CPD profile, as mentioned, is the renewal deadline as well. So in the case of psychologists, it would be at the end of May, the deadline.
Okay, great, thank you. Someone else is asking, well, a couple of people actually, are there any CPD that are not accepted by the HCPC? And is CPD from another country accepted as well?
Yeah, so I think what's being asked, is there any kind of CPD activities that wouldn't be accepted? We do not have a list of activities that we do not accept. The onus is kind of on the registrant to say, this is what I've done. And it's for them to demonstrate to us how it's benefited them and the service user. And as long as they can do that, and also to demonstrate that it is relevant to their scope of practice. So if it's an activity that has literally zero relevance to their, the role that they're carrying out and didn't benefit them in any way, then I would say don't mention that. But, it's really down to, we put the balls in the court of the registrant to say, this is what I've done, this is the activity I've done, and actually this is what I've learned from it. And as long as that detail is provided, then, the assessors have something to go on in terms of meeting those standards. And if you have carried out CPD in another country, that's absolutely fine. I know that we have some registrants that are registered with us that actually don't live in the UK or are split between the UK and other countries. That's absolutely fine. It doesn't matter where you do your CPD activity, as long as you can demonstrate that if you are audited, that's not a problem.
Great, thank you very much. A couple of other people are asking, just to clarify, is that 2-year audit period from 2 years of being HCPC registered or 2 years from being qualified, for example, like if you're a student and then you enter in, is it 2 years from being registered?
So what it is, so just to clarify, if you're newly qualified and you come onto our register, you need to be on the register continuously for 2 years before we can select you for audit, because that's only fair. It wouldn't be fair to audit you if you've only been on for about 6 months, for example. When we say 2 years, we actually mean the 2-year cycle. So that list I had up before, which we'll share with you, it tells you kind of when your cycle for your profession starts and when it ends. And it's that 2-year window there that we're auditing you for. So yeah, there's a breakdown of them. So for example, with psychologists, their deadline's the end of May, so their new cycle will start the 1st of June 2021, and that will run for a 2-year period. So it's that 2 years that we audit for. So hopefully that makes sense. But in the slides that we send, you'll see kind of when your renewal starts. And there's also, what we can probably do actually, Holly, is provide a link just to the actual cycle dates for each profession. That might be useful as well. So we can provide that with you. And it's those 2 years that are the audit period that we're asking for.
Okay, yeah. I've just found one here and it's gone again. Bear with me. Yeah, a couple of people are actually asking, can you use the online system and the HCPC website to upload a profile or upload your evidence and activities as you go along if you're not called for audit?
Unfortunately not. So the online system for CPD can only be used if you are selected for audit. There were discussions around whether we should have a system that allows our registrants to log in, log their CPD and reflections. But we did kind of vote against that at this time for the simple reason, obviously, we're funded by our registrants. To maintain such a system would cost us a large amount of money. And from the research that I've done, I found that a lot of professional bodies offer a similar system, or actually not even just professional bodies, there's actually quite a lot of different CPD systems and portals available out there as well. So what we kind of advise is if you do want an online system that allows you to do that, reach out to your professional body as a point of contact, or even just have a look online, and you'll probably see there's a lot of systems you can use, and a lot of them are free as well, which is great. But our system at this time has been built just purposely for those that are selected for CPD.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful. We've got quite a good comment from someone actually in response to not working during the lockdown, for example. I see maybe they're a physiotherapist or an occupational therapist, but they've been submitting videos of exercises they produce too for charity. So yeah, just really wanted to check, is that example of CPD, for example? Yeah, what would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're kind of submitting videos, I think that was the example of charities. The CPD part would be around kind of what research did you do before, what did you need to do to put together that video? Was there some research you needed to do? Did you speak to other colleagues? Where did you get that information from? Things like that, that would be all kind of part and parcel, and it's kind of, that's probably then more self-directed. And kind of, it's just thinking about, how you came to that end result and what learning activities you undertook. And then ultimately, how did that then benefit you and the service user? And obviously, in this case, the service user would be the person that you're, or the people that you are providing the video to. But it's just thinking about what did you have to do to put together that video? Essentially, what kind of research maybe went into that, because that would be all part of your CPD.
Great, thank you. I think probably we've answered a lot of the comments and questions. Alex is kindly just replying to those that we've not got around to. Just one final one, I think. How can someone become a CPD assessor? Do they be invited? Do they apply, for example?
Yeah, so we normally have our vacancies available on our website. We don't currently have any CPD assessor roles available now, but there may be some coming up later this year. So what I would advise that you do is keep an eye on the website. Alternatively, you can email CPD profiles at hcpc-uk.org and express that you are interested in becoming a CPD assessor, and we can provide those details to our partners department, who have a list of registrants who are actually interested, and they can then reach out to you when any kind of vacancies come up within your profession. So yeah, just keep your eye on the website, and do feel free to email us as well, and we can share your details with our partners department.
Great. I think that's it really. Yeah, if anyone has any further questions, we'll try and reply to them before the end. But yeah, that's it for now, I think.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Holly. Okay, so I think what I'll do then is I'll start wrapping up. Just got one more slide. So firstly, I just want to say thank you all for kind of, I'm sure a lot of you are on your lunch breaks, and the world's changed so much in the last year. There's been so much going on. So I just want to say thank you so much for joining us and joining myself today in this webinar. We do normally do these presentations in person, and they're a lot more kind of workshop based normally, in terms of kind of, sit around a table, having chats, set activities. We are hoping to get back to that at some point when kind of normality resumes. But for now, hopefully you have found this helpful. What we'll be doing is sending these slides, we'll email this to everyone that's kind of attended today. What I've done, I've included 2 activities in the slides, and I would probably encourage you to do these obviously in your own time, but also if you can do them with colleagues or as a group, or even just individually. But it's just activities around thinking about looking at some of your activities that you've done over the last couple of years, picking out a mixture and just reflecting on those really. So what did you learn from them? How did they benefit your service user? So kind of just getting yourself familiar with, what I've spoken about today, if you were audited, for example. So we'll be sending those around, and hopefully you find that useful. By all means, if you think of any questions after this webinar, you can drop us an email. But I really do hope, if you've taken anything from today, it's just some reassurance that, yes, we are your regulator ultimately, but we're really not the big bad wolf. We're really not, in any way trying to take you off that register or catch you out in any way. We really do want to support you. So, you know, if anything, please share what you've learned. If you've learned, hopefully, even just one thing from this presentation, do share with your colleagues. If you're having team meetings, please share. You know, it's just really good to share that knowledge. But yeah, just to kind of wrap up, and I'll stop talking at all of you now. Just want to say, I know it's been a very challenging year, and I really want to thank you all for what you've contributed in this last year, and I can imagine it's been challenging for all. So just kind of a massive thank you from us as the HCPC. Yeah, and I'll wrap it up there. I hope everyone has a lovely afternoon, and take care.